Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better, the podcast for world shapers, not spectators. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, a professional services firm that helps make potential possible for our clients. On this show, I talk with founders, executives, and innovators who share hard lessons, bold ideas, and real strategies for purpose-driven growth. This episode will offer practical insights you can use this week to solve forward. Because at Pariveda, we know that doing good only endures when we keep learning how to do better. Welcome to Doing Good by Doing Better. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Currie Triska, CEO of VolunteerNow, for a conversation on nonprofit leadership, the healing power of volunteerism, and why doing good starts with taking care of your own people. Rachel shares how she's rebuilding the way organizations think about innovation, community impact, and employee well-being, and why, as she says, we will never be more generative in our work than our teams are healthy. Let's jump in. I would love to start off with just what's energizing you lately at VolunteerNow.
Yeah, well, yesterday was our annual event, Hearts of Texas, and we got to finally publicly announce that we are doing a full new build of our technology platform, Volley. And that has been in the works for months. And so to finally get to make that public announcement was really exciting. And the reason why it's so energizing is in my sector, 80% of nonprofit leaders will tell you that there are essential services they cannot provide without volunteers. But only 3% of nonprofits have actually increased their volunteer management capacity in the last 16 years. So that is a problem. Yeah. And so that's a problem that Volley can solve with today's technology. And I am so excited to dive into actually designing that, which will start in like the next probably 6 weeks.
A lot of our listeners like to hear about your journey. Like, how did you get to VolunteerNow? Obviously, you didn't start there. Talk a little bit about your career and what were the pebbles that led you to this role?
I love that idea of pebbles because I think there are absolutely things that we only see about our journey in retrospect. And I was a overachiever, high capacity, had a lot of success early. I was an executive for the first time at the age of 26. And that was my identity. Like work it got the very best parts of me. Being further along in my career today, I really differentiate between who I am and what my role is, because those two things, being as tightly wound as they were, did not serve me. So if you ask me the overarching story of my journey, I would tell you I see myself, like my identity. I'm very woo-woo, Margaret. Like this is just, people know this about me. So I would describe myself as a modern medicine woman. And what I get to heal are organizations and systems and kind of tend the quiet parts of people's hearts. And so I can really pick that out of my story all the way from the beginning of my career.
Let me tell you, one of the reasons why I was really excited about having you on the show, and you and I had met and talking to you about things like systems thinking and really attacking the system. Some of the things that you are trying to achieve are dealing at a complexity and at a scale that you have aspirations to achieve. Woo-woo is so funny in the way you say that. There were so many things that were, I'm going to use the word unconventional in a good way, like that are unconventional about you based on what your degree, what you studied in the past to where you came to today. And I think what excites me about talking to you about your ideas is that the unconventional can challenge the norm. And so exploring what doing good in this case actually looks like in practice today is what we're going to be talking about a little bit more. I'm wondering how doing good actually looks. What does that look like in your day-to-day leadership? Not beyond the mission statement, because everybody has mission statements.
It's interesting. We did this employee health study there were I want to say there were about 120 nonprofits involved. And we worked with SMU's core team, one of their research teams on this project. And it was fascinating because the qualitative and quantitative research, no one talked about mission statements, needing better mission statements as a part of employee well-being. What we saw that was the feedback we heard from the people involved in the study was really we need better communication, both on the positive side of like proactive communication, informal check-ins, getting access to leaders, but then also on the opposite side of when there's a lack of quality communication in organization, that deeply impacted people. And that for our team was very affirming because a big part of us doing better is making sure that we prioritize taking care of our team. We talk a lot about how programs, that idea that gets so much attention in my sector is really shorthand for people. And so we have to take care of people because we will never be more generative in our work than our teams are healthy. And I think a lot of people mistake productivity as the goal versus going, no, we actually want to change the world. And to do that, we have to get to the point that we are doing truly generative work. That requires us to redefine a lot of things about how we show up.
I think that's really prevalent, especially in the non for profit space, where you're often, like you said, challenged with having to and feeling compelled from a very deep core of serving the mission. You often do find a lot of non for profits running in burnout mode.
Yes. There was a question that was posed to me recently about like, how do you balance community needs? How do you balance that? And I was like, that's not the thing we're actually needing to work on balancing in the nonprofit sector. We need to work on balancing our employees' well-being because no one that I know in the nonprofit sector is going to leave the community out to dry. I mean, we are mission focused. That is why we exist. That's what we're held accountable for. But that aspect of the actual care for the employee, that's where we have a lot of room for growth. We have funders who are looking at the way that we are allocating our funds, and some are still judging us based on overhead. And they want to see very low overhead and they want everything to go to the programs. And it's this incredible disconnect of I've worked at nonprofits where we've had employees who qualify for the services we provide because their compensation levels are so low. And so burnout is a huge issue in our sector because we're just not getting our resource allocations right.
Yeah, that's a great example of, I think, where leaders struggle translating that intention to real impact. And like you said, one of the balances is your employee health and
Yeah.
well being. What are some of the other things that you think leaders really struggle with in order to, as they're trying to figure out how to make that impact to the level that they aspire to?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in the nonprofit sector is we have a split market. So our customers are both our funders and our beneficiaries, but we don't operate in the way that traditional free markets operate because if we are totally delivering value to our customers, but our funders think we're doing a great job, we're going to continue to be funded and continue to operate even if we're not delivering the best impact. And so it's this really interesting experience that you see where sometimes nonprofits are having to and are spending a lot more energy in keeping the funders satisfied. It's this interesting balance between if a funder thinks this is the solution, do I deliver the solution the funder wants me to deliver? Or do I listen to my community who's telling me that they need something else and deliver the value that they're asking for? Because typically, in many nonprofits, the transaction isn't monetary. So they're not the ones who are going, yes, this is the value I want. And so I'm going to keep coming back to you. And it's just a very different system.
I think that's a pretty provocative point in that non for profits, especially, have to influence the funders because you're right, funders can provide constraints
Mhm.
on and conditions on what they're funding. And historically, there have been organizations that didn't manage their overhead very well. And so you have this challenge of maintaining that, having so much money, the expectation of going directly to the mission when you're actually hindering that.
And it's interesting because one of the things that we have to balance when you're taking philanthropic dollars is get to fail with philanthropic money. So if you're a startup and you take venture capital and you typically get about 5 to 6 years to prove out your model. Of course, you're responsible and have to give reports to your stakeholders and demonstrate that. I mean, the market's going to tell you either they're going to compensate you for what you're delivering or they're not going to. But in our sector, we have this, it almost incentivizes us not to innovate because there's this sense of if I take $1 million from a philanthropist and I try something and it could work, and if it works, it could be a breakthrough solution that totally changes the way that we deliver life-changing impacts to people. But I get it wrong. Nobody's going to give me that $1 million again. And so you have boards who are the fiduciary stewards of the nonprofits who are sitting there and they're having this interesting balance between, man, we need creative destruction in our sector. We need entirely revolutionary new solutions. But how much risk are we willing to take on whenever we're working with philanthropic dollars? So I think that's one thing that we sit a lot with in our space. And it's one of the reasons why we lean a lot into minimum viable products, or as I learned from a friend, we call them minimum lovable products. And we try to innovate at a very small scale and learn rapidly so that if I take something that's big and bold to my board, I have some really phenomenal data to demonstrate why I think this idea will scale. So the way we operate is we have an innovation side of the house and we have a solution side of the house. And our solution side of the house is where you see the things that we've been doing for decades as a 55-year-old organization. And we know this works. We know it delivers value. And for us, about 70% of our overall income is earned revenue. So that's also where a lot of our solutions have turned into. We've developed them into social entrepreneurship. On the innovation side of the house, that's where we're still very dependent on philanthropy. And we're very honest of like, hey, we have this big idea. We think it could be a breakthrough idea. We want you to fund it and let us try and see what happens. And so that, to me, I wish every nonprofit had the freedom to operate the way we do with that kind of dual engine structure.
One of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is the things that you're trying to achieve. Like, what is your aspiration with Volunteer Now?
Yeah. So our North Star is we are here to create volunteer solutions that change the world for good. My background, where I educationally does not reflect at all what I do today. My background, I have a master's in divinity, but I teach social solutions and entrepreneurship, at university. It's kind of an interesting thing, but my degree was very focused in history. And I have been a student of people movements. My work outside of work was always community organizing. And so I've worked in programs, I've worked in policy, I've worked in the faith-based sector. And what I believe at the end of the day is that people are the power that change the world. And so if we want to see nonprofit solutions not just be about service, but be about solving the most intractable issues in the world, we have to bring more people to the table. And I think volunteerism is that pathway. And so that's what we're innovating around and trying to figure out is how do we bring more people to the table to expand the good that the nonprofit sector can do.
How do you think about volunteerism and community engagement in today's context and maybe even in the workforce?
I think what people may not know, and this is, a quick Google search, you'll get all of the data on it. Volunteerism is one of the most healing things someone can do. And when I say healing, it heals people's physical bodies. It literally heals their heart. It extends their lifespan. And then when you start to look at it from a societal What volunteerism does is powerful. We live in a culture today, sadly, that is still very bifurcated. Most people are interacting with individuals who are very similar to them often, at least in terms of their social economic status. And I fundamentally believe that the gift that volunteerism gives is we become more whole and more ourselves as we are spending time in service to others, particularly people who are different than us. Because as we do that, it's almost like it unlocks parts of your humanity, almost like a new language or a
Almost like a new level of empathy
yeah, well, even
that
beyond empathy, like I think about the work that I did in Deep Ellum, and I grew up in like rural East Texas. And I come to Deep Ellum, and it's one of the historic arts districts in Dallas. I'm working in this community, and all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, writing spoken word poetry. And, I mean, it's just fundamentally shaping and opening up these parts of myself. And the way that I see the world is shifting because it's breaking down stereotypes as I interact with people that I'd never experienced before. And I think that's one of the beautiful gifts of volunteerism is it heals us, it heals society, and it reconnects us in really powerful ways to ourselves and one another.
it's interesting because in 2026, the Edelman Trust Barometer came out and said communities are actually more insular. Individuals are actually more insular given the stresses that the
Mhm.
people are experiencing externally. And it almost sounds like you're saying the pathway to that is through volunteerism. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I sometimes will draw concentric circles. And if the very center circle you imagine as the table in your home, and then the outer circle is the furthest edges of your community, the people who are most different than you. We typically will take particular populations. And so we'll go, how far out do you have to go before you intersect with someone like this? It is fascinating as, whether we're working with people who are homeless or if we're working on racial equity issues or when you just ask the question of how far do you have to go, it's very impactful when people are plotting that and they're realizing I can't even imagine a world where I'd have this person at the table in my home. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I've never had a person like this at the table in my home. And so that is the power of volunteerism is it gives us such a natural pathway out into our communities.
Given some of the ideas that you have about the power of volunteerism, how do you think expectations have changed over time from from the employees and the communities themselves?
That's an interesting question. I think I spend a lot more time thinking about how I want it to change.
Yeah, that's fine.
So if I were to answer the question of where we are today with workplace volunteerism, the exciting thing is we know it's powerful. 91% of employees who volunteer will tell you they feel better after they do. It does wonderful things for the corporations. 77% of people who do skills-based volunteerism will report that they feel more engaged. So there's no question, like volunteerism does wonderful things for the companies who are allowing their employees to engage in it. But there's good ways to do this, and there's ways that are really more self-serving for the companies. And I think that's the tension that I often find myself wrestling between is I know no matter what volunteer experience we plan, it's going to be good for the employees. But I can't say that about how it will impact the community because if I'm going to pick on like one type, whenever I say pick on this, it has a purpose. It is good. I want people to keep doing it. So that's not what I'm saying. But, we take like the big 1 day events. And so you'll have a company come out, they do a giant transformative 1 day event. It's amazing. It's impactful for the nonprofit. It generates a lot of value. And then they leave and the needs in the community are still there. And so for me, I think a lot about how do companies begin to think about what is success for them in terms of their volunteer impact. It may be just serving and that's okay, but could we begin to move companies into the place where they begin to take on some responsibility for actually solving some of the issues alongside nonprofits that we want to be different as we move forward. And that's where, I had a really interesting conversation with an executive of a very major corporation. And I told him, I was like, I can't wait for companies to start thinking about how you use your social platforms and your marketing budgets, and particularly the knowledge that companies have around consumer behavior to drive volunteerism. I mean, companies know there's this phenomenal intellectual property. Just if you think about like the algorithms that these companies have and how it drives consumer behavior, I'm like, let's focus that on doing good instead of generating more financial value for the goods that we sell.
I want to touch base on something that you said that I think is a really challenging balance for a lot of non for profits. And you talked about this a little bit in your innovation side, and of course, like bringing that to an operational level and creating this platform. And how do you think non for profits need to be thinking about the business side of non for profit?
Yeah, if there is something that lives rent free in my head, this is it. Like, if I could solve anything for the nonprofit sector, it would be how to move us away from such dependence on philanthropy. A lot of nonprofits have come up in the way that they think and operate. And in our sector, nonprofit is really thought of as a business model, but the reality is it's a tax status. So we have the opportunity to do things in very different ways. I find that a lot of nonprofits feel very constrained. And I think that goes back to that sense of we're not allowed to fail. So you have a nonprofit that is traditionally funded in philanthropy, and maybe they have a really exciting idea of how they could become more self-sustaining, but it's a big risk and they might lose money in the process, which means that money isn't going to go to serve people. And so there's this trade-off that's happening in the nonprofit sector where it's, man, there could be really long-term transformative changes we could be investing in and taking risks on. But what is at stake is a child eating today. Is a mom being able to pay her rent? Is a domestic violence victim having a safe place to stay? So how in this resource constrained system do I make the decision to take a big risk when there are such immediate needs that if I can't deliver on that value and deliver quickly, then there are people who are going to go without. That's what's at stake. And so I understand why we don't have as much innovation in our sector as I believe that we need. We're working on some really big ideas at VolunteerNow that if we're successful in the next 5 years, we believe will create entirely new business models for the nonprofit sector. And our hope is people will just like hop along behind us and do it. But we also have a model where we're looking at how do we, as a nonprofit that has an innovation arm, create business models and we prove them out, turn them into solutions, but then gift them to other nonprofits. And so that's a part of what we're looking at today, that as we are looking to grow a couple of our business lines, would it be possible for us to take some innovations and solutions and actually gift them to other nonprofits to help them be more revenue generating?
How are you guys still learning or evolving today?
If you want to know like what lights me up, it is learning. And our team just has a learning philosophy and a learning culture because we believe that drives innovation. I spend a lot of time reading. People have joked that I read the way that other people eat Tic Tacs. It's just one of those things. I think if you are going to be an innovator, there has to be a learning philosophy in your culture. Is the question, how are we still learning or what are we still learning? Because the how is very evolved. The what is a very different, more personal answer.
I think both are great. I
Okay.
think both are going to be really interesting. What are you learning?
Yeah. That question lands interestingly for me because there is the organizationally, what are we learning? So my team, I've introduced them to human centered design. That guides a lot of my work. I've firmly believe the people closest to the issues have the best solutions. And so we have to do the work of going to the community, listening to the community, making sure that we're actually delivering those solutions. And then, as I said earlier, our team really operates with minimum viable products or minimum lovable products. And so we take the thing and we go, this is what we think we learned, what we think we heard. And then what's the most basic version of this that we can actually test? And so we do a lot of paper prototyping. What is the simplest thing that's going to cost us the least amount of money, but actually help us learn and come to that typical MVP decision? Do we persevere? Do we pivot? Do we stop? And the most critical part of our learning is, what do we stop? And I think that's the thing that is often the hardest in the nonprofit sector, because if we stop doing something, generally that means there is a service that we were providing that we will no longer provide. And there's a fear, if I stop providing that, where are people going to go? And so for a team, I think us being willing to go, we will say no to this so that we can say yes to something that we believe is the thing that we can do that no one else can do. And so that learning of where to stop is really allowing us to better manage our energy as a team. I think we talk a lot about how do we manage budgets, but I'm really big on how do we actually manage our team's energy? So that on a team perspective is probably the biggest thing that we're really working on and learning and making sure we're integrating into how we operate.
The reflection and preservation of energy is definitely important because that's a limited resource that
Mhm.
has to get regenerated.
Yeah.
How do you create that space for your team,
Mhm.
especially for that reflection and that decision making space when things are moving fast and everything feels urgent and important at the same time?
Yeah. We have a couple of ways that we approach that. We very much believe that if people are experiencing burnout, that's not an individual problem, that's a system problem. So we are very sensitive in our organization to signs of burnout, because if that starts to happen, then we believe operationally we have not designed our system correctly. So we're very big on things being designed so that we can make changes and understand if those changes are being impactful or not. So this is just a small example, but we were recently evaluating our all hands meeting that we do every Monday. And I was asking my team for feedback, applying human-centered design in the office. And so in our all team meeting, I was like, what do you guys wish we would do more of? And the universal feedback was, Rachel, we meditate together occasionally as a team. We would like to start every Monday meeting that way.
Wow. You
Yeah,
don't hear that.
no.
That every day, right?
So in my mind, you could have said, Rachel, list 10 things that your team is going to come back with on how they're going to want to spend their time on Mondays. And taking time every week to meditate together wouldn't have been on my list. But we have developed a culture where it was introduced to a framework by McKinsey and Company. They have this quadrant that they use. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but ultimately it represents performance, survival mode, burnout, and restorative practices. And they have this beautiful exercise that they take people through, but ultimately you have to sit with the reality that you cannot stay in the performance zone without moving into survival and ultimately dropping down into burnout. And so as someone who was a spectacular overachiever and overfunctioner and can move into heroics when that's needed in an organization, it reflected what my journey has been as a leader. I tried so hard to stay in that performance zone, and really to my own detriment. And ultimately, I would say to the detriment of the organizations I served, because if your leader is in survival and then burnout, that's not good for the organization. So our team knows our expectation is you will perform and then you will drop into a restorative practice. We actually audited our teams taking their personal days, and they worked. we changed the way that we talked about them and we changed the way that we reference them. And we're seeing those numbers go up. But we really do believe you have to have a culture where people know the expectation is you perform and then you rest.
What do you think it takes to lead with clarity and compassion today, especially in such a noisy world? There's a lot of information overload, so to speak. And with the rise of Gen AI, there's also a lot of really disinformation, for lack of a better term, out there. What does it take to lead in this kind of environment?
Nothing replaces human connection. I find, particularly as we move through different stages of leadership and are elevated in organizations, it can become very easy to find yourself distanced from your team or distanced from the people that you serve. I believe that is something that as leaders, we have to be really intentional about finding ways to make sure we're not getting isolated in our work, because the work that we do can be incredibly urgent and incredibly demanding and time sensitive. But we need human connection. We need to walk out and look our teams in the eye and see how they are doing. We need to be in the communities that we are serving, talking with them, hearing directly from them. It's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about our technology, Volley, because I feel like so many people today are stuck behind their screens, and volunteerism gives people a pathway out. I heard a statistic the other day that blew my mind. And it was, even if you're on the low side of phone usage in America, which is like 2 to 3 hours a day, you are spending 6 weeks of your waking time on your phone, a month and a half out of 12 on your phone. And that was devastating to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I was doing so well. I am not. This is an area that I am going to have to grow more. And so I think just like, what can we do to reestablish that human connection? We need it and nothing replaces it.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about that is that's what your organization is also doing. Like you said, the
Yes.
path outward
Yeah.
and having that humanity. When things are really complex for yourself,
Mhm.
how do you ground yourself and create the space for yourself so that you can do your big thinking?
So my two most grounding practices are journaling. I have journaled since, I think, my oldest journal, I was 11. It's very embarrassing. The things that I
Not
wrote.
embarrassing, that's impressive.
Oh, the things that I wrote in that journal are very embarrassing. It's just like a very typical 11-year-old girl who's awkward and trying to figure out life and really, really, really wanted a boyfriend. But today it gives me this, like, someone asked me one day, they're like, Rachel, where do you come up with like the things? And for me, there's something that happens when I'm writing. It almost feels like it taps into this wisdom that I just haven't become conscious of yet. And so that's a really powerful grounding practice for me. And whether that wisdom is for me personally or my family or others, that is a non negotiable for me. The other is walking. Like, I get some of the best ideas I have ever had have been when I am out at White Rock Lake, which is here in Dallas, and I am just walking. And I didn't really understand the science behind it until someone was explaining to me that walking is bilateral movement, but that's the same kind of bilateral movement that EMDR is based on. And so when you're walking, and we see this in like monastic practices of like walking meditation, but it's literally rewiring your brain and making new ways of thinking possible. And so I encourage my team, like, go for walks during the workday. I want you to stop. I give you permission to stop and go and take our offices are by a beautiful park. Go and walk, because I know that's where I get my best ideas, and I want my team to be having their best thoughts. And so we walk.
One of the things I've read is that using paper and a pencil to draw or journal is highly connected to your creativity because it
Yes.
helps you create formulations and transform the way your brain is processing in that moment.
Mhm.
And so it's not surprising that journaling helps stimulate that for you as well.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. If you were to give leaders some advice on how to have a more meaningful impact through their leadership, where would you advise them to start?
The unlock for me was really a moment where I learned I needed to be more creative with my definition of success than culture was. In my early executive days, the definition of success was bigger and more money. So my organization needed to be bigger and I needed to have more revenue. There was literally a day I was crying in my office because I was like, I'm not doing it. We're not getting bigger and we're not like we were making more money, but not like exponentially more money. And I just felt that voice inside of me, that inner witness that sometimes speaks the deepest truths say, there is a different kind of success that you are meant to bring to this organization. And it reordered everything for me. And from there, we became an organization that was known nationally for how we did community engagement. And some of the largest nonprofits who are in that particular part of the field were coming to our organization and asking us for insights in how we did what we did. We were never this giant organization, but we shaped the way that people thought about community engagement across the United States. And then in our community, what I learned to ask was the question, would people miss us if we were gone? And that became the metric for success. And we became the backbone organization for the neighborhood of Deep Ellum and a part of a multi-sector collaborative public-private partnerships, a wide collaborative. But we got to see that community go from a tax base of 200 million to almost 2 billion today. When I was there, our organization was a huge part of the grassroots community effort side of that.
That's amazing. That's amazing accomplishments. What's the advice that you have for the next generation of non for profit leaders?
Well, I would give them the same advice I'm giving myself these days. My new mantra is I will not abandon joy. So I know that I'm a person who will not.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to abandon duty. Nobody's ever going to be worried about Rachel Currie Triska abandoning her responsibility or her duties or this sense of like a passion to make the world a better place. But sometimes I leave joy on the table because I get so busy just in the work of leading a really impactful, wonderful organization. And at the end of my life, I think I want to be proud of how much joy I shared. And not only, like, I would be heartbroken if at my memorial service, all people talked about was my work. I want to do meaningful, purposeful work, but I want my legacy to be more than that. And I think joy is that pathway into the something more.
All right. So we're going to go into our lightning round.
Okay.
We got 4 quick questions I like to ask at the end of every single show. What is a book or resource that has shaped your leadership thinking?
Master Change by Brad Stulberg. That was huge as we were leading through some major transformations and giving our team language of how to talk about embrace change.
And what's a habit that keeps you grounded?
Outside of journaling and walking, I have to get to the gym. My team knows that if Rachel is not in the gym at least 4 times a week, preferably more, that things are not going to be okay. So,
I'm very similar. I actually made it my job. That's how I get to the gym.
oh, wait, I need you to tell me more. How do we make going
Oh,
to the gym our job?
yeah. Well, I'm certified and I teach group exercise classes.
Oh,
So
awesome.
it's literally my job.
Okay.
A piece of advice you often give to folks.
I have found it to be true that work will take everything you give it. I would encourage people to be sure they keep their best energy for themselves. That I think is really the key to doing your best work. But work will take everything you will give it.
And what gives you hope about the future?
What I love, humanity is brilliant. Oh my gosh. Like the things that we do, like I think about the Industrial Revolution and the technology revolution, and I believe that we are due for a revolution in purpose. And so I get excited about a world where people value good the way that we value goods today. I think there is a world where work looks a lot more purposeful and that when we wake up and go to work in the morning, people are living into their very best selves, because it's not just about creating new products that people are going to throw away in a couple of years. It's about changing the world to be the kind of place that we all want to live in. I want people to get paid to solve poverty.
That's a win-win, by the way.
Yeah, right? Exactly. I'm like, let's let the market value that.
Well, if people want to learn more about Volunteer Now and the platforms and the services that you have, where can they go?
Yeah, our website is volnow.org. They can also connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.
All right. Any final encouragement or takeaway?
This would be my last takeaway. As we've established, I'm kind of woo-woo, and I believe that we feel truth in our bodies. And I think it's really powerful when leaders get comfortable with the reality that we have rational knowing and we have the kind of things we can't explain how we know. And I think sometimes we lean way too far into I know this, it's logical, but if we actually sat with it in our bodies, something would say that's not as true as you think it is. And it takes a lot of courage as a leader to go, I see a vision of the world and people are telling me it doesn't, I can't do it, but there is something inside of me that says that it is possible, that I can innovate in this way, that I can create this good, that we can do better. And if you're that deep thing inside of you that will not lie to you says yes, sit with it, spend some more time with it. There are so many beautiful things. Every beautiful thing outside of nature lived in someone's imagination first, and they had to be willing to go, this can be real. So I want more leaders leaning into that kind of irrational knowing.
Well, Rachel Currie Triska, Master of Divinity, human-centered design person, community impact leader. We are so happy to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Margaret. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Doing Good by Doing Better. I'm Margaret Rogers, CEO of Pariveda, and I hope this conversation offered you a new way to take your ideas to impact. Follow on Apple or Spotify and join us every other week as we keep learning how to do good by doing better.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.